A major American city is facing a mathematical certainty, one so brutal it threatens the existence of everything in its path, and if it isn't stopped, the city runs out of water. Not a shortage, not a restriction, a full system collapse. Right now, in the 8th largest city in Texas, 320,000 people are watching their water supply vanish. 2 reservoirs, the lifeblood of an entire coastal region, have plunged to historic lows, with their combined capacity crashing toward the single digits. Corpus Christi is staring into the abyss. So the city did what any community on the brink would do. It declared a water emergency, imposed strict conservation rules on its citizens, and threatened fines for anyone who used too much. But here's the part nobody says out loud. The rules do not apply to everyone. While residents were forced to let their lawns die, massive industrial factories, some of the largest petrochemical plants on the planet, were often allowed to keep pulling millions of gallons a day from the same dying system, often at a discount. This is not a story about a drought. This is a story about who gets the last drop of water when there isn't enough to go around. So the real question is Corpus Christi fighting a force of nature, or is it fighting a battle against itself? Corpus Christi was never supposed to be an industrial superpower. It sits on the Gulf Coast of Texas, a region defined by relentless sun, hurricane threats, and a delicate balance of freshwater rivers meeting the saltwater of the sea. Annual rainfall is volatile, arriving in torrential downpours or disappearing for months at a time. The ground is flat, coastal prairie, the rivers that feed it. The Nueces and the Frio are notoriously fickle, prone to both devastating floods and withering droughts. By every measurement of a stable water system, this was a place for a port city, a tourist town, a community in tune with its bay. It was not a place designed to support one of the most water-intensive industrial corridors in the world. And yet, that is what it has become. In the mid-20th century, Corpus Christi was a regional hub of roughly 100,000 residents. Ambitious, growing, but still fundamentally tethered to the limits of its environment. To secure its future, the city built a system designed for that era. Lake Corpus Christi was completed in 1958, a sprawling reservoir on the Nueces River. Then came Choke Canyon Reservoir, finished in 1982, on the Frio River, a massive project by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation designed to add a deep reserve of water for the region's inevitable dry spells. Together, they formed a 2-lake system that was supposed to guarantee the city's survival for a century. For a time, it seemed like more than enough. Then came the boom. The North American Free Trade Agreement, the explosion of global shipping, and an insatiable appetite for plastics and chemicals transformed the Texas coast. The port of Corpus Christi became one of the busiest in the United States. And with the port came the plants, refineries, chemical manufacturers, and now colossal plastics facilities backed by global capital. Industrial planners saw cheap land, a deep-water port, and a favorable regulatory climate. They did not see a fragile water system. They saw an asset to be exploited. Today, the Corpus Christi region is a paradox. A city of over 320,000 residents facing some of the most severe water restrictions in the state, existing side by side with an industrial complex that consumes, by some estimates, over half of the entire municipal water supply. Half. For a handful of corporate users. And as the city grows and the factories expand, all of them are drinking from the same 2 reservoirs, built for a different time, a different climate, and a different world. It was not a sustainable system. It never was. The crisis arrived silently, then all at once. For years, the combined storage of Lake Corpus Christi and Choke Canyon had been trending downward, a slow, grim decline driven by a multi-year drought that had baked South Texas dry. Water managers watched the numbers, made adjustments, and prayed for rain. The rain never came, not in the amounts needed. The decline accelerated. The comfortable buffer the city had relied on for 60 years began to evaporate under the unforgiving Texas sun. By 2024, the situation had become critical. The combined capacity of the 2 reservoirs, the sole source for hundreds of thousands of people, was plummeting. The bathtub rings on the shores of Lake Corpus Christi grew wider, exposing cracked earth and forgotten foundations. Docks that once floated on deep water now sat beached on dry land, monuments to a wetter past. The city's water supply was visibly, undeniably disappearing. This was not an isolated event. All across South Texas, the same story was playing out. 40 miles west of San Antonio, Medina Lake, a century-old reservoir in the Texas Hill Country, had essentially ceased to exist. Completed in 1913, its aging earthen canals bled water through seepage, while the drought choked off its inflows. It fell to just 4% of its capacity. A functioning lake became a geological memory. Further south, the situation was even more dire. The Falcon International Reservoir, a massive binational water source on the Rio Grande shared between the United States and Mexico, crashed to single-digit capacity. This wasn't just a local problem. Falcon Reservoir supplies water to millions of people on both sides of the border. Its collapse threatened agriculture, municipal supplies, and diplomatic relations. From the hill country to the Rio Grande Valley, the water infrastructure of the 20th century was failing under the pressure of a 21st century megadrought, and Corpus Christi was next in line. The city's response was predictable and necessary. In the face of catastrophe, the municipal government enacted Stage 3 drought restrictions. Watering your lawn became a crime punishable by fines. Washing your car in your driveway was forbidden. Residents were told to cut back, to conserve every drop, to treat water as the precious, vanishing resource it had become. The message was clear. The city was in a fight for its life, and everyone had to sacrifice. The survival of Corpus Christi depended on it. And yet, that wasn't the whole truth. Because while homeowners were being monitored and fined, a different set of rules often applied just a few miles away in the industrial zone of San Patricio County. Here, a new titan was rising. Gulf Coast Growth Ventures, a multi-billion-dollar petrochemical facility jointly owned by two of the most powerful corporations on Earth, ExxonMobil and the Saudi Basic Industries Corporation, or SABIC. GCGV is one of the largest plastics plants in the world, built to produce the component materials for everything from packaging to car parts. It began operations in 2022, right as the drought was tightening its grip, and its thirst was biblical. The plant was engineered to consume a staggering amount of fresh water every single day. Some estimates place its daily use in the millions of gallons pulled directly from the same Nueces River system that feeds Corpus Christi's dying reservoirs. Here was the uncomfortable, infuriating heart of the crisis. While 320,000 people were forced into rationing, a single corporate entity was permitted to consume a volume of water equivalent to thousands of households. And often they did so under contracts that exempted them from the mandatory cuts imposed on residents. They paid a discounted industrial rate, a fraction of what a normal citizen pays, for the privilege of draining a shared public resource during a historic emergency. It was a system that privatized the water but socialized the shortage. Isabel Ariza, a community activist with the Group for the Greater Good, framed the injustice in stark terms. The city was asking its people to sacrifice for the survival of the community, while simultaneously allowing corporate giants to operate as if the crisis didn't exist. It was not a conservation plan. It was a contradiction. Water managers, caught between political pressure and physical reality, defended the industrial contracts as essential for economic development. The jobs, the tax base, the investment, they all depended on keeping the plants running. But critics asked a simple, brutal question. What good is a job if you can't turn on your tap? Was the city building an economy, or was it subsidizing its own demise? The plan was supposed to be the city's salvation, the engineering marvel that would make Corpus Christi drought-proof forever. A seawater desalination plant. For years, city leaders and water planners had pointed to the Gulf of Mexico, that vast and seemingly limitless body of water at their doorstep, as the ultimate solution. If the rivers ran dry, they would simply drink the sea. The plan was ambitious. Build a large-scale facility capable of turning salt water into millions of gallons of fresh drinking water every day, supplementing the city's reservoir supply and breaking its dependence on rainfall. It was Corpus Christi's version of the third straw, the city's own billion-dollar gamble on engineering its way out of an impossible problem. But the project never seemed to leave the drawing board. It became a story of delays, of political infighting, of ballooning costs. The initial price tag spiraled, with estimates climbing toward $1 billion. Arguments erupted over where to locate the plant, how to dispose of the super salty brine left over from the process, and who, exactly, would pay for it. The completion date, once set for the near future, was pushed back, and then pushed back again. What started as a forward-thinking solution became a symbol of the city's paralysis. The desalination plant was always just over the horizon, a promise of future security that did nothing to solve the present-day crisis. While the reservoirs drained and the drought worsened, the city's ultimate backup plan remained a paper dream. Environmental groups argued that the plant, if it were ever built, would primarily serve to enable even more industrial expansion. using vast amounts of energy to supply water to the very factories that were exacerbating the problem. They saw it not as a solution for the public, but as a subsidy for the petrochemical industry. Paulette Guajardo, the city's mayor and the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, led by Toby Baker, found themselves caught in a crossfire. They were tasked with securing a water future for a major city, but every potential path was fraught with economic and political peril. The engineering was possible. The physics worked, but the will, the funding, and the consensus were missing. The plant that was meant to be a lifeline became another point of contention in a community already fractured by the stress of a dwindling resource. The failure to deliver the desalination plant left Corpus Christi with no good options. It was completely exposed. The city had built its entire existence on a two-reservoir system that was now demonstrably failing. It had encouraged an industrial boom that was now consuming an unsustainable share of what little water was left. And its one big idea for a backup plan was stuck in development hell. The crisis was no longer theoretical. It was here. Every day the city was losing a resource it could not replace, with no immediate prospect of a new supply. The question was no longer if the system would fail, but when. And what would happen on the day the water simply stopped? The story of Corpus Christi is not happening in a vacuum. It is a single acute symptom of a much larger sickness spreading across the entire American Southwest. The water systems built in the 20th century were designed with a core assumption that the climate was stable, that rainfall patterns would remain within a predictable historical range, that rivers would deliver a certain volume of water year after year. That entire assumption is now broken. Look at the Rio Grande, the great river that forms the border between Texas and Mexico. For centuries, it has been the lifeblood for more than 3 million people. But today, it is a river in retreat. Upstream in New Mexico, the Elephant Butte Reservoir, a colossal structure completed in 1916 that is critical to water deliveries for both New Mexico and Texas, has seen its levels plummet. Its decline starves the river before it even reaches El Paso. Further downstream, the binational Amistad and Falcon reservoirs, co-managed by the International Boundary and Water Commission, or IBWC, have become grim barometers of the crisis. These lakes, symbols of cooperation built in 1969 and 1954, were supposed to regulate the river and share its bounty. Now they are sharing scarcity. The stark images from Falcon Reservoir in 2024, showing it at less than 10% capacity, sent shockwaves through the region. Boat ramps ended in vast mudflats. Entire sections of the lake simply vanished, revealing the river's original channel, a pale ghost of its former self. Dr. Maria Elena Jenner, the former U.S. Commissioner of the IBWC, spent years navigating the impossible diplomacy of a shrinking river, trying to enforce a 1944 treaty between the U.S. and Mexico that was written for a world of abundance, not a world of drought. Martin Castro, a water researcher in South Texas, has documented how this decline is not just an environmental issue, but a crisis of economic survival and social justice for border communities. This is the larger context in which Corpus Christi finds itself. The city's plight is not unique. It is the canary in the coal mine for a future where water is the ultimate currency. The state's political leadership, under Governor Greg Abbott, has acknowledged the crisis, promoting the development of new water strategies through the Texas Water Development Board. But the scale of the problem dwarfs the proposed solutions. State Representative Gina Hinoza and others have called for more aggressive state-level intervention, arguing that local solutions are not enough to solve a regional climate catastrophe. The core of the problem is a fundamental mismatch. The legal and economic systems governing water were built for a stable past. The hydrological reality is one of volatile decline. The old rules, the old treaties, the old assumptions about who gets water and why are being rendered obsolete by the physics of a hotter, drier world. And in that gap between the old rules and the new reality, cities like Corpus Christi are being left to fend for themselves, caught in a desperate scramble for the last remaining drops. The crisis on the Texas coast is a preview of a conflict that will define the 21st century. A battle not between nations, but between neighbors, over a resource that no one can live without. The water is still draining. The reservoirs are not refilling. The industrial plants are still operating. And for the 320,000 residents of Corpus Christi, none of it is enough. The city has done what it can on the margins. It has implemented some of the most stringent residential water conservation measures in the country. It has invested in infrastructure to reduce leaks and improve efficiency. It has recycled wastewater, and yet the core equation remains unchanged. A finite, shrinking supply is being drained by a demand that is politically and economically locked in place. The fight for Corpus Christi's future is now a fight over values. What is water for? Is it a public trust, a shared resource to be protected for the survival of the entire community? Or is it a commodity, an industrial input to be sold to the highest bidder or the most politically connected user until it is gone? The city's leadership, from former Mayor Joe McComb to current Mayor Paulette Guajardo, has wrestled with this question, trying to balance economic growth with environmental reality. But the physics of the situation are unforgiving. As the lake levels continue to drop, the quality of the remaining water becomes a new and growing concern. Lower water levels mean higher concentrations of salts, minerals, and potential contaminants. Algal blooms become more frequent in the warmer, shallower water. The cost of treating the water to make it safe to drink goes up, a cost that is inevitably passed on to the same residents who are already paying the price of scarcity. It is a vicious cycle. Less water becomes worse water, which becomes more expensive water. The story of Corpus Christi is not a cautionary tale. Not yet. It is a live fire exercise in crisis management. A community looking at an impossible problem and realizing that the old engineering and the old politics are not enough. The delayed desalination plant sits as a monument to that fact. A billion-dollar solution that arrived too late. The real solution, if one exists, will not be found in a new pipe or a new dam. It will be found in the difficult, painful, and politically dangerous work of deciding who gets to use the water that is left. It will require rewriting the rules that created this imbalance in the first place. This is not a story about a single city. It is the story of Phoenix, of Los Angeles, of every community in a dry land that built a 20th century dream on 20th century water. Corpus Christi is simply on the front line, the place where the math stopped working first. The city's struggle is a look into a future where the fights over water are no longer about lawns and car washes, but about the fundamental right to exist. The reservoirs are still falling. The sun is still shining, and somewhere on the Texas coast, the clock is still running.